I walked in on the sound of my wife laughing, one of those deep, intimate laughs you only give someone who knows your body like muscle memory. Only it wasn't me she was laughing with. It was Jasper, my best friend since college, my business partner, my brother in everything but blood. They were half-dressed in my living room, in my house, beneath a painting we bought in Florence when we were still pretending to be a family. They didn't look surprised to see me. They looked relieved, like I was the last variable in a problem they'd already solved behind my back. That was the moment something ruptured. Not just my marriage, not just my trust, but the version of me that believed loyalty meant something. I didn't say a word. I walked out of that room knowing I would never be the same man again, and they would never see me coming. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. I walked in on the sound of my wife laughing, one of those deep, private laughs that don't belong in public, don't belong in daylight, and sure as hell don't belong in the arms of your oldest friend. My key was still in the lock. My name was still on the lease. But everything else, her body language, the flicker in her eyes, the sudden silence, told me I had become a guest in my own story. Kira stood barefoot by the kitchen island, hair tousled like she'd just left our bed, wearing my college hoodie. And leaning beside her, too close, too familiar, was Jasper Maddox, the man who'd helped me build my first startup, the man who toasted our engagement with top-shelf bourbon, the man who now looked at my wife with a type of hunger he didn't even try to hide. There were no gasps, no scrambling to explain, no apologies, just three people frozen in a moment that would unravel a decade of love, friendship, and loyalty. I didn't raise my voice, didn't ask questions. I walked past them, straight into the study, grabbed the signed merger contracts Jasper had dropped off 2 weeks earlier, and tore them in half. When I walked out, neither of them moved. "I'll have Miles send you the dissolution terms," I said to Jasper. To Kira, I said nothing. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. It had been 4 hours since that moment. 4 hours since the axis of my life tilted. And yet here I was, still wearing the same suit, standing alone in the back of a black Escalade, staring at the East River through tinted windows, pretending I was just another Manhattan executive waiting for the next meeting. But there were no more meetings today, just the silence. And the silence was deafening. It wasn't that I hadn't seen the cracks. I just hadn't wanted to admit they mattered. Kira had grown distant over the past year, not cruel, not cold, just unavailable. She moved like someone already living in a different chapter, and when I asked if something was wrong, she'd smile that polished, practiced smile and say, "You're just distracted with the company, babe. It's okay." Except it wasn't okay. She'd stopped asking about the kids' school recitals. She'd started staying late at the studio more than usual. I'd catch her on calls that ended too quickly when I entered the room. But I'd convinced myself it was the stress of parenting, of aging, of evolving careers. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, and I let it go. That was my first mistake. The second was trusting Jasper. We met freshman year at Stanford. He was brilliant, no doubt about that. Loud, charismatic, unapologetically ambitious. The kind of guy who knew how to charm professors and win pitch competitions with nothing but swagger and buzzwords. We launched our first app together sophomore year and sold it for 6 figures. It wasn't the money that hooked us. It was the thrill of building something from nothing, of proving we belonged. For years, we were a team. And when I got married, he was the best man. Now, that title felt like a mockery. I finally stepped out of the SUV and into the lobby of the Midtown apartment I'd kept for emergencies. Back when I thought emergencies meant product launches and blown deadlines, not your wife sleeping with your best friend. The doorman nodded politely. I didn't return the gesture. The elevator ride to the 37th floor was too quiet, too fast. When I entered the apartment, the stale air hit me like a wall. I hadn't been here in months. It still smelled like old leather and last year's scotch. I tossed the keys onto the counter and slumped into the couch. I didn't cry. Couldn't. It was like the tears were there, held hostage behind a wall of disbelief. But inside, something deeper cracked. Something quieter than rage. Something more permanent. I thought about my sons, Ash and Silas, 8 and 5, bright, messy, full of questions. They didn't know anything yet. They still thought I was Superman. Still thought their mom made the world spin. Still believed in bedtime stories and happily ever after. I would have to be the one to break their world open. And I didn't know if I had the strength. That was when my phone lit up. A message from Miles Hammond, my attorney and oldest advisor at Crosstech. Miles, heard something. Jasper's pitching Lyra's Series B to our former investors. Wants to integrate back-end infrastructure you built. I read the message 3 times, and the quiet grief that had wrapped around me like a blanket lifted, just slightly, because now I saw it. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was theft. Strategic. Planned. And suddenly I wasn't grieving anymore. I was calculating. If Jasper had moved in on my wife and my code base in the same breath, this wasn't an affair. It was a hostile takeover. And if he'd been brazen enough to use our investors, he'd left footprints. My body snapped into motion before my mind caught up. I forwarded the message to Miles with one word: move. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up the Crosstech infrastructure logs, and started the forensic trace. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed form. It became fuel. Kira and Jasper thought they'd taken something from me, my pride, my legacy, my name. They thought I'd vanish quietly, but what they didn't understand was this. I didn't build my life by being reactive. I built it by being relentless. And this wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of their undoing. By the time I arrived at Miles Hammond's office the next morning, the snow from the previous night had already melted off the pavement. New York was thawing out. I wasn't. His office sat on the 24th floor of a sleek, charcoal-colored building near Bryant Park. Modern, minimalist, exactly like Miles himself. He was already standing when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, a legal pad marked with red tabs laid out on the glass conference table like a battlefield map. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I replied, tossing my coat over the chair. "Walk me through it." He sat. "Jasper's been planning this longer than you think." I spoke to 2 of our old seed round investors last night. He approached them a month ago with a pitch deck for Lyra's Series B. He's claiming sole IP origination, using stripped-down Crosstech builds to demo his platform. I clenched my jaw. He's using my framework. Worse, he's saying he built it while consulting for Crosstech, trying to argue it was freelance material, not employer-owned. He was on retainer under NDA. I've already filed a cease and desist. I nodded, silent for a beat. "And Kira?" Miles hesitated. "Say it," I snapped. "She filed paperwork last week to reclassify the East 71st property under her name. Quiet title action. Looks like she forged a notarized signature with an old authorization template. She's trying to strip me from the deed? She already has, for now." I leaned back, every muscle in my neck tensing. "She didn't just cheat," I said. "She tried to erase me." Miles looked at me, clinical, calm. He was the only person outside of my boys who had seen me build Crosstech from scratch. He knew I could handle betrayal. But this was personal. She's also amended the custody clause in the prenup, he added. She's positioning herself as primary custodian, claiming you're emotionally volatile, work-obsessed, detached from the kids. I blinked. Hard. That's rich, I muttered. I've been raising them while she disappears to wellness retreats and artist residencies. She's playing the optics game. You know how that works. I did. Too well. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the morning traffic crawling through the city. Jasper and Kira weren't just having an affair. They were gutting me, professionally, legally, financially. And for the first time, I stopped asking why. The only question that mattered now was how to make them regret it. That night, I returned to the brownstone in Harlem where the kids were staying with their nanny, Yvette. I still had joint custody until the court reviewed the prenup challenge. I needed to reinforce stability, for them and for myself. Silas ran to the door first, holding a paper rocket in one hand and a sticky fruit roll-up in the other. Ash trailed behind, quieter, more aware. "Dad!" Silas shouted. "We made moon drawings!" I smiled, lifting him into my arms. His fingers were sticky, and his breath smelled like grape candy. I didn't care. I held him close like I hadn't seen him in months. Ash looked at me, tilting his head. "Did Mommy tell you we're moving to Portugal?" The question felt like a punch to the throat. I set Silas down gently. "Portugal? She said she might be getting a job there, that we might live near the beach, but she said you probably won't go." I crouched to meet Ash at eye level. "Buddy, no one's moving anywhere, not without talking to me first." He nodded, unsure, not scared, just confused. But I knew that look. I'd worn it once when my own father disappeared overnight after a failed deal left him bankrupt. I knew what it meant to have the world pulled from beneath your feet before you even understood gravity. I tucked Ash's hair behind his ear and smiled. "Let's go read." Later, after bedtime, I opened Kira's private email server from an old shared tablet she'd left behind. My name was still auto-logged into the admin settings. Inside was a chain of messages, one in particular labeled Transition Strategy, Ethan Timeline. It was dated 3 months ago. In it, Kira had mapped out everything. Jasper's planned launch of Lyra, their narrative to the press, amicable split, creative differences, her PR angles, newfound voice as an independent artist mother, and even a calculated rollout of legal documentation. Everything was coordinated. Every step of my fall had been scheduled before I ever saw it coming. I clicked on a Dropbox link embedded in one of the emails. It opened a folder named Asset Shielding. Inside, signed false affidavits, dummy LLCs routed through Lisbon and London, and forged cross-collateral agreements transferring assets, including our East 71st penthouse, to Kira Voss Holdings. She wasn't just unfaithful, she was building an empire with stolen bricks. The next morning, I met with Ivy Delgado, an old contact from our tech accelerator days, who had since become a private equity watchdog. If anyone could trace how Jasper was laundering stolen code through Lyra's infrastructure, it was Ivy. "You want me to dig into your ex-best friend's dirty stack?" she said, one eyebrow raised. "You must be desperate." I didn't flinch. "I'm not desperate. I'm done playing defense," she smirked. "Good, because I don't work for anyone still hoping to be liked." "I'm not." "Then I'm in." She scanned the Dropbox folder I'd forwarded the night before, pausing at the contract forged in my name. "This clause here," she said, tapping her screen. "He left the metadata unchanged. Rookie mistake. This document was created under your Crosstech internal framework, on your IP. Can you prove it? I can bury him with it." She looked up at me, dead serious. "You're not just dealing with a betrayal, Ethan. This is corporate espionage. If this goes to trial, I can get the Department of Commerce to freeze Lyra's expansion within a month." I let that sink in. For the first time in days, I felt the floor settle beneath me. That afternoon, I received an email from a blocked sender. The subject line read, "You're making this worse than it needs to be." I opened it. "Ethan, this wasn't supposed to be a war. You're smart enough to know how this game works. You focused on numbers. I focused on vision. I never meant to hurt you, but you got sloppy. You stopped listening. She stopped believing. Let's not drag the kids through this. Let's settle quietly. Walk away with dignity." Jasper. There was no signature, just an attached PDF labeled Reconciliation Agreement, offering me a small buyout for my Crosstech shares in exchange for signing an NDA and withdrawing legal action. The arrogance. He thought I'd fold, that I'd prioritize image over justice. I replied with 2 words. "See you." Then I forwarded the email to Ivy, to Miles, and to my crisis media consultant. If Jasper wanted war, he'd chosen the wrong general. That weekend, I took Ash and Silas to the Met. It was a cold Saturday, but the museum glowed warm and safe. We wandered through Egyptian artifacts and impressionist wings. I let them ask endless questions. I didn't check my phone once. Outside, after hot cocoa and street pretzels, Ash asked, "Daddy, are you and Mommy mad at each other?" I crouched beside him again. "We're figuring some hard things out, bud." "Are you gonna stop being our daddy?" I felt something knot in my throat. "No. Never. Nothing in this world can stop me from being your dad." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Okay." That night, I tucked them in and kissed their foreheads like it was the last time. Not because I believed it, but because they deserved the kind of love that never left any room for doubt. When I returned to the Midtown apartment, my inbox pinged. Ivy had finished her deep dive. Got 'em. Their server logs show transfer of your proprietary modules to a cloned Git repo 72 hours before Lyra's first investor pitch. Time-stamped, IP traced. Also, your name still sits on 2 dormant license modules. You technically still own the shellcode Lyra depends on. They don't have an app. They have a lawsuit waiting to happen. I sat in the dark, screen glowing. This wasn't just a betrayal story anymore. This was going to be an autopsy on their empire, their lies, their delusion. I had tried to be quiet, graceful, noble, but noble men get buried with nothing but principle. It was time to rebuild, with fire. There's something surgical about betrayal, how it slices away everything soft in you and leaves only the raw nerve of instinct. I felt it that Monday morning when I walked into the Crosstech boardroom and saw the empty chair where Jasper once sat. He hadn't even bothered to show. A decade of partnership reduced to a name being scratched off a brass plate by the building manager outside our door. The moment I stepped in, silence followed. The team, my team, looked at me like they didn't know what to say. Their eyes bounced between grief, tension, and curiosity. I didn't waste time. Jasper Maddox is no longer affiliated with Crosstech, effective immediately. No one moved. I continued, voice level. If you've been approached about transferring assets, source files, or modules related to our back-end stack, legal will be following up. No questions, just facts. Someone exhaled sharply. It might have been Anthony, our lead engineer. He looked pale. "I know some of you had relationships with him. I know this hurts. But this company was never built on comfort. It was built on clarity, and I won't allow theft to masquerade as ambition." They nodded, slowly, unsure if they were grieving a loss or witnessing a necessary purge. 2 days later, Kira filed an emergency petition for temporary full custody. The claim: Ethan Cross is emotionally unstable and likely to retaliate against his children's mother during a pending business dispute involving her current partner. The judge assigned a preliminary review without a hearing. Standard protocol in high-conflict cases. It wasn't just a legal play. It was psychological warfare. I sat in Miles's office, the letter printed on thick legal stock, the language sharp and dispassionate. "She's betting on your silence," Miles said. "She won't get it," I replied. He leaned forward. "We have one shot at this. The kids are the emotional center of this case. You need to be above reproach." I stared at the floor. I wasn't sleeping. I was barely eating. My mind pulsed with strategy, but my body felt like it was fraying at the seams. "I can do that," I said. "Whatever it takes." That night, I went through every file Jasper had touched in our stack. Line by line, module by module, I was hunting for buried code, anything that could trace Lyra's platform back to my architecture. I found it in a pattern library Jasper once mocked me for developing. He called it over-engineered fluff. Turns out, it was the exact same design schema Lyra had demoed in their VC pitch deck, only now rebranded with new color palettes and font kits. But the bones were mine. I documented everything. I compiled a digital forensics folder and looped Ivy in to verify timestamps. And then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I called my mother. "Elena Cross," she answered on the second ring, always formal. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking for the first time in days. There was a pause. "Ethan," she replied, softer now. "Talk to me." I told her everything, not just the cheating, not just the company, but the fear, the exhaustion, the ache of watching your life dissolve and still showing up every morning like a soldier dressing for war. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer cliches or empty warmth. When I finished, she asked, "Do you still know who you are?" I hesitated. "I think so." "Good," she said, "because when people try to erase your name, the only thing that matters is that you never forget how you built it." 3 days later, I walked into the courthouse with Miles beside me and 3 boxes of evidence in the trunk. Ivy had given me the final report, proof that 38% of Lyra's functional code was cloned from proprietary cross-tech modules. Legally, it was a ticking bomb, but emotionally, it was just the beginning. Kira arrived with her lawyer, a woman named Shauna Westbrook, who wore red-framed glasses and a permanent smirk. Kira didn't look at me, not even once. We didn't speak until the judge requested a private mediation, just the 2 of us and our attorneys. We sat in a gray room with a polished oak table and fluorescent lights that made everything feel colder. Kira crossed her legs, composed. I studied her face, trying to find the woman I married. She was in there somewhere, beneath the sculpted cheekbones and the $3,000 designer coat. "You've turned this into a spectacle," she said. I laughed once, dry, sharp. "You filed for emergency custody and started laundering assets through shell companies. Spare me the lecture." She leaned in, her voice low. "You always needed control. I just stopped letting you have it." "You didn't stop me," I said. "You betrayed me. I chose myself." "No," I corrected. "You chose ambition dressed in self-righteousness." We stared at each other, 2 people who once built a life now standing on opposite ends of a battlefield. Then she said something that made my pulse spike. "You never saw me, not the real me. You were married to the version of me that fit your image. You just liked having a wife who made you look stable." "That's bullshit," I said calmly. "Is it?" I looked at her and realized something. She believed it. She had rewritten the story in her head to justify the destruction. To her, this wasn't betrayal. It was liberation. And that scared me more than the lies. Because you can fight deception, but you can't fight someone who thinks they're the hero of your downfall. The next week, I launched the full legal assault. Cease and desist orders, IP violation filings, emergency injunction on Lyra's codebase. and a formal report filed to the Department of Commerce, citing Jasper's theft under Section 1832 of the Economic Espionage Act. The press got wind by Friday. The story broke on Tech Radar, then Business Insider. Co-founder war erupts at Cross Tech, stolen code allegations threaten rising startup Lyra. Suddenly, Jasper was scrambling. Investors froze their funding. The Lyra team issued a statement denying all wrongdoing, but their site went dark within 48 hours. Then came the phone call. "Ethan," Jasper said, voice rushed. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. "You win, all right? You always needed to, but don't burn everything down. You did that the moment you crossed the line. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You don't get to define how this ends, Jasper. Not anymore." He went quiet, then hung up. That weekend, I met Ilara Quinn at a donor gala hosted by the Brooklyn Tech Collective. She was speaking on a panel about ethical AI in consumer apps. I'd heard her name before. Whispers of her restructuring failed seed-stage companies into sustainable platforms. Quiet, efficient, brutal when necessary. After the panel, we ended up at the bar. "You're Ethan Cross," she said. "The guy whose co-founder imploded on Twitter last night." I chuckled. "Guilty." She sipped her drink. "I liked your comment about accountability over appearance." "You read the statement?" "Every word." We talked for 2 hours. About the business, the betrayal, the damage, but also about our parents, our childhoods, the ways we both learned to be ruthless out of necessity. She didn't ask me for pity, and she didn't offer it. It was the first conversation I'd had in months that didn't feel like a negotiation. As I watched her walk away that night, I felt something strange stir in my chest. Not love, not yet, but something better. Hope. That Tuesday, the court ruled in my favor on the emergency custody petition. Kira's attempt to fabricate my emotional instability collapsed under cross-examination and a forensic audit of her deleted texts, one of which casually referred to me as a legal liability that needs to be cornered. The judge reinstated joint custody and sealed the case pending full evaluation. When I picked up Ash and Silas that afternoon, Ash ran into my arms with a smile that made every sleepless night worth it. "Did you win, Dad?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I kissed his head and whispered, "We're just getting started." Later that week, I sat on the rooftop of the Midtown apartment with a whiskey in hand and the Manhattan skyline stretching out before me. Ilara texted, "Heard Lyra's final VC round got yanked. You sleeping better yet?" I smiled. "Yes, but I'm not done yet. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reconstruction, of legacy, of fatherhood, of identity. I wasn't just burning their empire down. I was laying the foundation for my own. And this time, I'd build it with eyes wide open. The first time I saw the cracks in their empire was on a Thursday morning, tucked between a stale almond croissant and a barrage of unread emails. Ivy had forwarded a leak, an anonymous tip sent to several tech journalists and regulators. The subject line read, "Lyra's internal Slack logs, proof of IP theft, NDA breaches, and coordinated fraud." I stared at the attached screenshots. Jasper's name appeared dozens of times. He won't see it coming. He's still playing chess on a board we flipped weeks ago. Just fork the damn module and clean the fingerprint. If Ivy Crosstech finds it, we say it's inspired by. We control the story. If the PR angle holds, Ethan's cooked. I forwarded the leak to Miles and our PR team with one instruction. Push it public. We're not hiding anymore. By 11 a.m., TechCrunch, Fast Company, and The Verge were all running headlines. Internal leak reveals premeditated IP theft at Lyra. Jasper Maddox and Kira Voss named in ethics breach. By 2 p.m., Lyra's board had announced a temporary operational suspension. Their app was pulled from the App Store. Investors pulled out in waves. And Jasper? He disappeared, shut off his phone, closed his social profiles, and went silent. But Kira? She showed up. She was waiting for me outside Ash and Silas's school that afternoon. Designer coat, oversized sunglasses, the same sense of control she'd worn like armor since the day I found her with Jasper. She walked over as I helped the boys into the SUV. "We need to talk," she said, voice flat. I closed the car door. "This isn't the place," I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her sunglasses. "You've gone too far, Ethan. You think this makes you a hero?" "No," I said, "but it makes you accountable." She scoffed. "We were supposed to handle this like adults. Instead, you've turned it into a circus. You orchestrated a theft, forged financial documents, weaponized custody, and now you want to play the civility card? You're poisoning the narrative." "No, Kira, I'm correcting it." Her face cracked, just slightly, a flicker of fear, or maybe rage, I couldn't tell. Then she said, "I loved you, once." I looked her dead in the eye. "No, you loved what I gave you. There's a difference." She turned and walked away, coat flaring like a curtain at the end of a play. That night, Alara and I sat on my rooftop, wine between us, the city lights stretching to the horizon. She hadn't asked for details about my marriage. She didn't need to. She read me like source code, line by line, clean and without judgment. "I talked to someone at Lyra today," she said, "an ex-product manager. Said Jasper didn't just copy you. He bragged about doing it." "Doesn't surprise me. He called you too nice to protect your own legacy." I smirked. Guess he was wrong. Alara turned to face me fully. "So what now?" I thought about it, about the long days in court, the backroom deals, the damage control, the bruises no one saw, and about Ash reading on my lap, Silas snoring against my shoulder, the boys who watched me like I was still whole, even after everything shattered. "I finish what they started," I said, "and then I build something that no one can steal." The following week, the custody review resumed. Kira came prepared, with carefully edited videos of me rushing through bedtime routines, screenshots of Slack messages where I'd vented about exhaustion, and therapist notes implying emotional distance. But I came with my sons, with their school records, showing perfect attendance under my care, with photos of breakfast messes and field trip forms signed in my handwriting, with Yvette's sworn affidavit describing who packed the lunches, who stayed up through asthma attacks, who showed up, consistently. I didn't fight with venom. I fought with proof, and slowly the narrative shifted. When the judge asked Ash where he felt most safe, he didn't hesitate. With Dad. The room went still. Even Kira's lawyer didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The damage was done. The next bomb dropped on a Friday. Jasper's name hit the Department of Justice public filings, facing formal investigation under trade secret misappropriation and corporate fraud. He'd tried to flee to London, but the agency had flagged his accounts. His passport was now frozen. I read the filing in silence, jaw locked. He was finished, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt numb. Because somewhere, under the ashes of rage, I still remembered who we used to be. Before the money, before the ego. I remembered the garage we worked out of in Palo Alto, building mock-ups with no sleep and less funding. But that version of him was long gone, and so was the version of me who forgave betrayal. Days later, I opened my inbox to find a new message. Subject: For your son's sake. From Kira. I lost. I know that now. But you don't have to keep punishing me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to stop the bleeding. We were both to blame. I just moved first. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her, but because I finally didn't owe her anything. Weeks passed. Lyra dissolved. Jasper resurfaced, filing for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Kira retreated from the spotlight, her gallery exhibitions quietly canceled. And me? I launched TwinSpark, a hybrid tech and mentorship platform that matched inner-city youth with venture-backed incubators. Ilara helped me build the board. Ivy funded the pilot. The mayor signed off within a month. Ash and Silas helped me cut the ribbon on launch day, wearing oversized branded hoodies and grinning like CEOs. When a reporter asked why I started the program, I said, because integrity shouldn't be a luxury in business. It should be the foundation. The quote trended on LinkedIn for a week, but I wasn't chasing noise anymore. I was building something permanent. One night, as I stood by the window watching snow coat the city again, Ilara wrapped her arms around my waist from behind. Still thinking about them? She asked. No, I said. I'm thinking about how far I've come. She smiled against my shoulder. You didn't just survive, Ethan. You rebuilt. I turned to face her. No, I said. I transcended. If vengeance ever had a scent, it was the champagne in my glass at the Columbia Club Gala. The room buzzed with silk gowns and $10,000 watches, every conversation laced with subtle power games. But tonight, I wasn't just another face in the crowd. I was the reason the crowd had gathered. 3 months after the collapse of Lyra, I stood beneath a crystal chandelier accepting the Innovator's Integrity Award, a recognition not just of what I'd built, but of what I had survived without losing my soul. Or worse, my son's. The MC's voice echoed through the hall. Ethan Cross is not just a builder of technologies, but a builder of truth, accountability, and legacy. I stepped up to the mic, tucks pressed, posture unshakable. As I scanned the sea of elite faces, I saw some who'd once bet against me, and now they were clapping. For me. I took a breath. When you lose everything you thought mattered, what's left isn't weakness, it's clarity. My name was dragged through shadows. My code was stolen. My story was rewritten by people who thought silence was consent. They were wrong. I rebuilt. Not just my company, but my truth. And tonight, I stand here not as a victim, but as a man no longer afraid to be underestimated. Applause thundered. But my eyes drifted to the back of the room, where a figure stood beneath the soft haze of gold lighting. Kira. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen since the TEDx gala we attended together years ago, back when we still pretended. Her eyes locked with mine, not cold, not pleading, just resigned. She didn't try to approach. She knew she wasn't part of this chapter. Not anymore. The next morning, the papers exploded. Forbes. From betrayal to billion-dollar redemption, Ethan Cross wins Integrity Award after Lyra collapse. NYT style. Elegance, ethics, and Ethan, the return of a Manhattan tech titan. Business Insider. Kira Voss. Absent from Cross Gala, sources confirm quiet legal settlement. The truth had finally taken center stage. But I wasn't done yet. At noon, I met Miles and Ivy in a corner office overlooking Central Park. Ivy pulled out a binder labeled Post-Lyra Reclamation Strategy. She flipped to a page with a chart. Here's the domino effect, she said. Lyra's investors are suing Jasper for fraud. Kira's civil liability is being bundled into a class action, thanks to her forged IP documents. Miles added, We've also finalized the ownership clawback. You now control all dormant Lyra infrastructure, legally absorbed into TwinSpark's architecture. I blinked. Wait, we own their code? Ivy grinned. every broken piece of it. It hit me then. Not only had they failed to destroy me, they'd unintentionally funded my next empire. I stood, walking to the window, watching a flurry of taxis bleed through Fifth Avenue like yellow blood cells. This was it. The apex. Not just revenge, dominance. That weekend, Ash had a piano recital. He was nervous, hands sweating through his sleeves, legs bouncing as we waited backstage. I knelt beside him. Scared? He nodded. You know the notes? Yeah. Then don't play for perfection, I said. Play like the piano owes you everything. He smiled. Like you do? I nodded. Exactly. When he took the stage, my chest tightened. Not from fear, but from pride. He didn't just play well. He played like he owned the room. After the final note, he glanced at me from the piano bench. My boy, unshaken, still whole, still mine. A week later, I received a letter via courier. It wasn't emailed, it wasn't typed. It was handwritten, black ink, curved, elegant strokes I recognized instantly. Kira. Ethan. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, not dead, just gone from this world we once shared. I'm moving to the coast, not Lisbon, just Maine. You were right about everything. Jasper used me, and I let him. I thought power would make me whole. Instead, it hollowed me out. I watched your gala speech. I cried, not out of regret, out of shame. I lost my family, my name, and whatever version of myself I still respected. You won, and you deserved to. But don't let victory harden you. The boys need the man I once saw, the man who picked paint colors with Silas and coached Ash through math tests, not the man who sees every relationship as a chess match. Please don't become what we were. Kira. I folded the letter, slipped it into the desk drawer, and locked it, not out of anger, but because she no longer held power over my future. The final blow came 2 months later. I sat at Ilara's loft, barefoot, watching her rearrange artwork as jazz hummed low in the background. She turned and smiled. You got the notice, didn't you? I held up the official court envelope. Jasper pled guilty to 4 counts. Prison time? 18 months, federal. She nodded. Justice moves slow, but it moves. I raised a glass to my lips. To closure. She raised hers in return. No. To beginnings. We clinked. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't broken anymore. Not bitter, not bleeding, just free. The next morning, I walked Ash and Silas through the Twin Spark offices for the first time. This is where the magic happens? Ash asked. Not magic, I replied. Work. They followed me into the boardroom where Ilara was waiting, whiteboard covered in strategy notes, coffee in one hand. Ash pointed to her and whispered, Is she your new girlfriend? I laughed. She's the boss. Ilara winked. Damn right I am. We sat at the table, the 4 of us, building not just a company, but a future that couldn't be rewritten by betrayal or stolen by greed. Ash leaned against me. Silas asked for snacks, and the city moved on outside, unaware that somewhere on the 41st floor of a midtown high-rise, a man had rebuilt his life from ash and fire, and he had done it without losing his soul. The courthouse smelled like old stone and recycled air, dry, indifferent, the kind of place built to flatten emotion and elevate procedure. But for me, this was the final battlefield. The hearing was scheduled for 9:00 a.m., sharp. I arrived at 8:45, not because I was eager, but because I refused to give the past even a second's head start. Today wasn't about punishment. It was about closure. Kira arrived just after me, her attorney in tow. No sunglasses this time, no statement coat, Just a dark blazer and tied-back hair. Practical. Hollow. We hadn't spoken since her letter. And now, we didn't need to. Everything that needed saying was already documented, on affidavits, in exhibits, in the long paper trail left behind by ambition turned desperate. The judge, a stern woman with glasses halfway down her nose, reviewed the terms of the final civil resolution with clipped efficiency. It was all there. Kira's formal withdrawal from all claims to Crosstech and Twin Spark, the asset restitution order, and full custody split confirmation. At one point, the judge looked up. Mr. Cross, is there anything you'd like to add before we record the final agreement? I stood. Only this. What's being resolved here today isn't just legal. It's generational. These boys deserve a home where loyalty is louder than lies. I intend to build that every day from here forward. She nodded. Noted. Let's proceed. By noon, it was over. The court clerk handed me a thick packet of signed orders. My attorney patted my shoulder. Kira walked out without a word. Her lawyer paused just long enough to offer a small, respectful nod. It was all quiet, muted, not dramatic, not fiery, just done. When I stepped outside, the Manhattan sky was overcast but dry, the kind of gray that asked nothing of you. I turned my phone back on and saw a single text from Alara. They finally buried the past, ready to build the future. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked a few blocks, passing familiar cafes and storefronts, until I ended up in a park, one I used to take the boys to before everything cracked. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and let the silence hit me. No rage, no grief, no thrill. Just space, room to breathe, room to begin. That night, the boys were asleep early. I stepped onto the balcony with a glass of whiskey and called Alara. Hey, she said. It's done, I replied. She exhaled. I know. There was a pause. Then she asked, Do you feel free? I thought about it. Not yet, I said, but I feel possible. She laughed lightly. I'll take that. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my office inbox. Legal letterhead. Foreign stamps. Jasper Maddox, FA, U.S. Department of Justice. Final sentencing. He had accepted a plea deal. 18 months in low-security federal prison, 5 years barred from corporate board participation, and full personal bankruptcy. He was done. Officially. But it wasn't the sentence that struck me. It was the attached victim impact statement, my own, which the court had allowed me to submit months earlier. I had nearly forgotten it. But now, rereading it, I saw how far I'd come. I don't want Jasper imprisoned. I want him erased. From the story he tried to rewrite without permission. He took what I built, tried to wear my name without paying the price of its weight. But what he'll never understand is that legacy isn't about logos or patents. It's about showing your children that integrity still wins, even when it bleeds. I closed the file. That version of me, the one who'd written those words, was already fading. Not weak, just complete. There was nothing more to prove. That weekend, Alara and I took the boys upstate to Beacon. Just the four of us. A quiet Airbnb with creaky floors, mismatched mugs, and the kind of stillness you only find where cell signals die. We hiked. We built fires. We made pancakes with too much baking powder and laughed when they deflated. And one night, after the boys were asleep, we sat on the porch beneath string lights and warm wool blankets. She looked at me, serious for once. I've been offered something, she said. I turned. What kind of something? An executive partnership in a new venture fund, global, based in Singapore. I blinked. When? 2 months. And you're telling me this now because Because I don't want to leave, but I need to know what we are. I didn't speak. Not right away. Because love wasn't the first thing that came to mind. Responsibility was. To my boys. To my company. To the fragile piece I'd built from wreckage. I can't move, I said finally. Not now. Maybe not for years. She nodded. I didn't think so. Then I said, but I don't want to lose you. She smiled. Then don't. We didn't talk about it further. We didn't need to. Some things don't require declarations, just presence. Weeks passed. Twin Spark expanded into a new vertical, one focused on trauma-informed leadership training for young founders. The pilot programs launched in Detroit and Oakland, funded quietly by Ivy, and executed with ruthless grace by Ilara's hand-picked team. I stepped back from the spotlight, started spending more time on the ground, visiting schools, talking to students, investing in people who reminded me of who I used to be, scrappy, uncertain, but burning with potential. One afternoon, Ash asked if he could help me write a speech for a local mentorship gala. What should I say? I asked him. He thought for a long moment, legs swinging from my office chair. Tell them the truth, he said. Which truth? That even when it hurts, you can still win. I kissed the top of his head, and that's exactly what I told the room. Spring in Manhattan has a particular kind of sound, brakes hissing against asphalt, soft jazz drifting from overpriced cafes, and the quiet, steady pulse of ambition waking from hibernation. 3 years ago, I would have heard it all as noise. Now, it felt like rhythm, background music to a life no longer dictated by reaction, but by intention. I walked Ash and Silas to school that morning. No nanny, no assistant, just the three of us and a couple of bagels wrapped in wax paper. Silas was explaining, with too much animation, how he planned to build a rocket ship out of juice boxes. Ash corrected him, insisting that orbital thrust needed more than imagination. I just listened, not because I didn't want to speak, but because I wanted to remember this version of us, simple, unforced, whole. When I dropped them off, Ash hugged me tightly and whispered, "Are you coming to career day?" Wouldn't miss it for the world. As I turned to leave, I saw another dad watching us from across the school courtyard, tie crooked, eyes tired. He nodded at me, almost embarrassed. Maybe he'd heard the headlines. Maybe he hadn't. Either way, he looked like a man trying. I nodded back. Sometimes, survival is silent. That afternoon, I met with Ilara in a sunlit room at the top of the Twin Spark headquarters. She had just flown in from Tokyo, jet lag barely visible beneath her sharp blazer and sharper eyes. "We closed the Series B," she said, sliding a signed term sheet across the table. 120 million. Oversubscribed. 3 months early. I nodded. The board? Unanimous. I glanced out the window. Midtown shimmered below like a promise kept. Your name's on this one, Ethan, she added. No ghost co-founders, no backdoor deals. I know, I said. But what I didn't say out loud was this. It wasn't about names anymore. Not mine, not theirs, not even Jasper's or Kira's. It was about building something that couldn't be stolen because it didn't depend on hiding. It stood on truth, and the truth held. Later that week, I spoke at Columbia, my alma mater. The lecture hall was full of 20-year-olds hungry for shortcuts. Some had read the full story. Some only knew the sanitized version. Betrayal, rebuild, redemption. I told them none of that mattered. What matters, I said, is what you do after the lights go off and the applause fades. Can you still build without the need to be seen? Can you still show up without needing someone to notice? One kid raised his hand. How did you get past the anger? I paused. I didn't. I just learned how to aim it. One morning, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. They let him out early. Reduced sentence. Thought you should know. M. Jasper. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't respond. Didn't want to. There was nothing left to say. Whatever apology he might have rehearsed in his cell didn't matter now. But I'll admit, I checked the web later that night. No interviews, no rebrand, no startup launch. Just a blurry photo someone had snapped of him exiting a federal halfway house in Queens. He looked older, smaller. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel fury. I felt distance. The kind of distance that proves you've outgrown the thing that tried to break you. 6 months later, Twin Spark expanded into 6 new cities. We hired our first 100 full-time employees. We launched a scholarship fund in Silas's name for kids who couldn't afford coding boot camps but had raw talent worth betting on. And every Friday, without fail, I picked up my sons from school and we got burgers from the same diner on 2nd Avenue. They called me Burger Boss. I didn't correct them. Once Silas asked, "Do bad people always lose?" "No," I said honestly, "but good people always get back up." He thought about that for a while, then nodded. Okay, that was enough for me. In October, Kira wrote again, a short email this time. No emotion, no apology, just an update. I've relocated permanently to Portland. I'm doing community work, art therapy for domestic trauma survivors. The boys are welcome to visit if they choose. I'll respect their timing. Thank you for protecting them, even when I couldn't see what they needed. I didn't reply, but I printed it. Because someday, when the boys ask questions that deserve answers, I want them to have the full picture. Not just the pain, but the attempt at repair, even if it came too late. By year's end, I was invited to speak at the National Tech Ethics Summit. Not because of Twin Spark's valuation, but because of what we stood for. I stood at the podium, looking out at executives who'd built empires with borrowed code, leveraged reputations, and unpaid interns. They looked at me like I was the ghost of consequences' future. I didn't give them what they wanted. I gave them what they needed. You don't fix a broken system by hacking it better, I said. You fix it by telling the truth out loud, even when your voice shakes. Some clapped, some shifted uncomfortably. All of them heard me. And that was enough. On New Year's Eve, I stood alone on my rooftop balcony while fireworks cracked across the skyline. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even nostalgic. I was ready. Alara came up behind me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. To what? She asked. I raised mine. To a story no one else gets to write but me. We drank. And below us, the city lit up with new beginnings. Sometimes life doesn't break us in a single moment. It erodes us slowly, through betrayals that wear the soul thin, until one day, we're standing alone with nothing but truth in our hands. But it's in that stillness, that unbearable silence, where we find out who we really are. Not in the comfort of loyalty, but in the wreckage of deception. This story was never just about loss or revenge. It was about rebuilding, brick by brick, without bitterness. It was about choosing integrity, not just because it's right, but because it's the only way to truly live with yourself. Empires may rise on borrowed power, but they crumble in the face of quiet resilience. And sometimes, the most powerful victories are the ones no one sees. Wounds healed in silence, futures built in spite of the past. If you've ever been broken, know this: you are not finished. You are being refined. And your story isn't over. Not yet. Thank you for watching and walking through this journey with us. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow us for more powerful stories. Until next time.